Ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, and anyone else that happens to have internet access, which, quite frankly, I think you should have to have a license to have, but that's another podcast. My name is Rick. Welcome back to the Sound Horizons podcast, brought to you by Toontrack. Today, we continue our legacy of talking to incredible and amazing people that just happen to have cool jobs in this industry that we love called music. And I wish I had a list. Okay, a list this long of amazing things to say about our next guest, but it wouldn't be a long enough list. Again, Toontrack only brings you the greatest people in our industry to talk to. Today's no difference. I'd like you to put your hands together. Now, I ask you to do that a lot on this podcast, and I realize that there's a big trust fall on my part because I don't know what most of you are doing right now, and I probably don't want to. But for what it's worth, put your hands together for my friend and your soon-to-be friend, Mr. Monty Powell. Dun, dun, dun. See, Monty did it, and he missed. How are you, good sir?
I am so good, and it's so good to see you, Rick.
So podcasts are weird, and they normally have this whole like arc thing where it's like you start real slow and you build up. I'm jumping right in, and I'm presuming everybody watching is familiar with who you are. So we're not going to do anything like that. We're going to go right to it. I think one of the most amazing components of your career is how completely and thoroughly expansive it seemed to be in a specific window of time in the history of country music in particular. Now, you do way more than country music, this I know, but when you look at your career from the outside, there was this window where you seemed to be the only human person writing for everybody that was doing anything in country music. And I was wondering if you could speak to that as a songwriter. We're going to talk a lot about songwriting today, but was that what it was like? Did it seem like that to you, or is it when it rains, it pours kind of thing?
It seemed to me like I was, 22 years old in 1849 when gold was found at Sutter's Mill in California. Yeah. I mean, I was where the lightning struck in Nashville as country music, sort of became the modern version of what we know. I mean, we know the classic stuff and even sort of the roads it kind of took in the 70s with cool things, but that turn from the late 80s to the early 90s and through there was a complete paradigm shift for Nashville as the songwriting capital of the world and for country music to really make its, stamp on the world as well. And I got there right at the time that I was at the age, that I was at the proficiency, that I was at the ambition, where all those things could sort of meet that energy. So it was a real interesting lightning in a bottle scenario.
Well, when you talk about that change, as someone that was there in Nashville as it was changing, from your perspective on the inside, was there a lot of pushback from traditional Nashville as country music started to veer more towards the pop and rock arenas and become more of a phenomenon than maybe it had been in the 80s or the 70s?
There wasn't much. I think everyone realized that, hey, the train just arrived and we should all get on it. And what was great at that point in time was folks like myself who were in our, early to mid 20s and stuff that were just really getting our kit going. We were working alongside Harlan Howard, and the great older generation of songwriters that successfully made that transition into sort of what we were doing as well. And the other thing that I think was really important is that at that point in time, even though some of the production values and stuff maybe became a little bit more modern, it was still pretty much classic Nashville storytelling, country music as we knew it. And so there wasn't a lot of pushback. I think most people recognized it as our time has arrived.
So interestingly enough, too, chronologically, you talked about how this change in the late 80s, early 90s for country music. At the time, and still to this day, one of the other major hubs for contemporary Christian music is Nashville. And that also started to go through the same amazing growth spurt at the same time. Is that relative to one another, or do you think it just was, again, coincidental?
Um, I think that it was coincidental, but I think that they linked up really quickly, and so you found a lot of the session players that were playing on Amy Grant records or, all of a sudden playing on contemporary country records. And so the pool became very wide. And again, I think that the early contemporary Christian music scene, which I was heavily involved in, was also an outgrowth of the roots that they had already put down. It's not like it arrived brand new. It's
Right.
almost like sort of it found itself sort of at the same time that the modern, now what we call sort of the 90s country revolution sort of found itself. But they were both standing on pretty solid foundations in Nashville at the time.
Did you talk about the shared pool of talent? Did that extend to songwriting and songwriters as well? Were people basically writing for both genres, or did you find that there were guys that wrote for CCM artists versus guys that wrote for country artists? Or did you see a delineation in that at that time?
The delineation was there, and then the Venn diagram of people that were both was very obvious too. I mean, so you had people like Gary Chapman, writing number one country songs and also, writing songs for his, then wife Amy Grant. So there was quite a bit of crossover. I think a lot of people found success in both areas because at the time it was it was still pretty traditional, like, "Hey, we're gonna get a band together and go play a song."
Mm.
And so people were flexing their muscle writing about, uh, trucks and cars and dogs and were just as much flexing their muscles writing about maybe their faith path as well.
Okay, so you're there during this height, you explode. Now, as you're still very, very active, which we're going to talk about in the industry and doing things, and you look at Nashville where it is now,
Mhm.
is it unrecognizable to you, or is this pretty much where you thought it would end up being?
Sometimes I drive by and don't recognize, and I have to turn around and drive back. Um, it has really, really, I think, fundamentally at the DNA level, changed. And it is interesting to have lived through the version of it sort of becoming itself, and then the version of it truly becoming something else.
Mm. Okay. I want to put a pin on that for a second. I want to talk about something that I think a lot of people are incredibly interested in because being a songwriter, which was your primary trade,
Mhm.
is a dark art. And it's one of those mysterious, it could mean many different things to many different people. It's like a mastering engineer. I put songwriters and mastering engineers in the same category. It's like, okay, we know it's important, but what exactly, how does it, and if you talk to five different mastering engineers and five different songwriters, they will all have a different version of how their craft works. So for you as a songwriter, again, you had mentioned the fact you start as a musician, like many songwriters do, and I don't mean that if you have to play an instrument to write a song. I just mean you're a guitar player. That was your primary instrument, and you're playing. At what particular point in time, how does the transition for you work to I'm going to be a player to maybe I'm going to start to try and prepare a different journey for other people?
I had a couple of those soul crushing moments early on in my career as a guitar player in Nashville,
Hmm.
where you realize that you don't have that gear.
Hmm.
You know, the the rarefied air that is a session guitar player in Nashville is the top 0.1%, and not even just as players, but that ability to create in real time, as things are moving fast. And I didn't have that, and it broke my heart.
Hmm.
And I literally wanted to quit, but I had always written songs. And the process of songwriting was much more internal. It happened on my schedule,
Hmm.
not as the chart went by at 120 beats per minute, and I was trying to catch up, you know? And so I really found out that, my craft was to take the time to edit and craft something on my own terms, and that was just a different skill that the guitar players who were playing on the records that I really wanted to play on had, and I made my peace with that.
Mm. Do you find as a songwriter coming from a musical background, meaning you're a guitar player, has that helped you in the process? Because there again, we're in a different time. At the time of this taping, for prosperity's sake, you don't even have to know anything about music to make music today. So, as someone who sort of, for lack of a better term, came up the traditional way, benefit or limitation kind of thinking around the terms of a guitar or an instrument?
Totally a benefit. Uh, in fact, I was, and I'm known as a lyricist, as a
Mhm.
lyric-driven songwriter. Um, and when I was 11 years old, I still have the notebooks here in this house somewhere. I was rewriting lyrics to John Denver melodies, and I actually have a notepad that says, "To the tune of Sunshine on My Shoulders,"
Wow.
but my own lyric because I didn't have any music, but I had concepts and I had words and I had something I wanted to say to the world. And it became obvious pretty quick that unless I paired that with a strong musical sense as well, I was always going to be chasing someone else's creation. So I jumped in and decided to learn guitar so that I could create my own melodies and chords to set these lyrics to that were really what was the most important thing to me.
Okay. So that was an extension of the personal journey then. It was like, hey, you already had the one idea. Now you needed to be able to kind of back it up with some other stuff, which is very cool.
Yeah.
So when you think about songwriting, because you've seen it in all of its permutations, I mean, you're on the inside. We could talk about guys that write by themselves. We can talk about people that go to Warner Chappell and write in one of their studios, or work for publishers, or go sit above a studio and write songs as a group. Is there any right or wrong way for someone interested in songwriting to pursue that?
No, absolutely not. Um, I think that to find your strength, that you need to attempt every single one of those because you really don't know which one you're going to gel with. So as a younger kid, I wrote by myself because there wasn't anybody else to write with.
Mm,
And then when I got my first sort of invitations based on things that I had written by myself, that some people who were much better than I was and much further along in the industry listened to and said, your solo attempts are above the bar, but they need to be kind of brought a little bit more, shaped a little bit more, made round because the hole is round and yours may be a little square. And and through that, I fell in love with the co-writing process, which is such a big part of what happens sort of in the Nashville tradition. And that didn't necessarily have to happen. I could have done co-writing sessions, hated it, and gone back to being a solo writer. I could have been James Taylor, I
mm,
could have been Billy Joel. I write my songs. So I think it's really good to create things on your own, to get in some co-writing situations, to getting some of the larger co-writing situations that now exist, say in the
mm.
hip hop world or whatever, where now you're creating in real time with a producer and a track maker and perhaps an artist in a room singing a top line and you're scribbling words. I think it's good for the craft and for the muscle.
Mm. So your career, though, eventually takes this kind of turn. So Diamond Rio is a huge part of the early part of your career. You talk to us a little bit about that, because not only did you work with them from a writing standpoint, but you worked as a producer as well for that group of guys. And that really, when you look at your discography, that seems to be a turning point where a lot of these things that you talked about, right place, right time, started to happen. Diamond Rio is what we used to call a band, and they write songs. Just in case you weren't familiar, it's not like a plug-in or anything. It's an actual group of human men, and that did. So Monty's going to give us a little bit of information there. So
That's awesome. They actually played every
yeah.
note on records. Um, I think the ambition piece comes into play there as well. Nashville's a big soupy place. A lot was going on. And I felt early on that maybe the guitar was going to be my ticket. I realized that fairly early on that wasn't the case, that songwriting was really where my strength lay, but that being in the role of producer opens up the door for me to have a place to insert the things that I'm writing.
Mm.
And so I decided to learn about production as a vehicle to have a better shot for my songs to get recorded. And so basically, Diamond Rio was a band created specifically because their lead singer, Marty Rowe, was my roommate in college. This is as random as it gets. I mean, we
Wow.
literally unpack our suitcases in a room, 12 by 12. Hi, I'm Monty. Hi, I'm Marty. What do you do? I'm going to be a star in country music. Well, that's interesting. I'm going to be in the Songwriting Hall of Fame one year.
Wow.
And we decided to attack the music business together, from that moment on. And so it was created specifically to not only give them the platform as the band, but to give me a platform to say, I can write things that I believe that if you guys play this way on, we'll have hits with.
Could you have ever imagined where that would have led, that combination?
Never in a gazillion years. I didn't even know there was a music business. I wound up in Nashville to go to college because it was the small Christian college that my parents met at. So it's that generational, um, my particular brand of
Sure.
Southern fundamentalist Christianity that got me to that place. And then suddenly you're in Nashville and you look around and you're like, wait a minute, there's a business for this? I mean, I don't just have to play the Elks Club in Calhoun, Georgia, or the homecoming dance. And it was, boy, was that just a mind-blowing revelation that there was a legitimate business path for this.
So the Diamond Rio experience as a producer, you talked about how you were going to try as a session guitar player. You come to terms with I can't. I'm just not that guy. What kept you from going further down the production road, and instead of focusing on songwriting as the guy that was sort of like you said, learning on the spot how to do this producing?
Um, I did produce a lot of stuff. It
Yeah,
just like anyone else, wasn't all successful, you know. But Diamond Rio was sort of like the first attempt, and all of a sudden, we've got a platinum record, and I got 6 songs on it, you know. And the industry becomes aware of you really quickly when you kind of come out of the chute like that. And to be completely transparent and honest, it's hard to produce.
mm,
It's much easier to write and let someone else go into, for hours and days on end and do guitar overdubs and tune vocals and all that kind of stuff. And so it was the moment appeared to me where I could stand on the shoulders of this big production piece, still continue to do it, but that, the ears of the town were open to me as just a songwriter and walk through that door.
mm. So you find yourself in that situation, and as you look back on it, is it what when you were going through it, was it what you thought it would be as it happened to becoming famous and I mean and successful and having some notoriety? Is it how you imagined it, or was it completely a different experience than you thought it would be?
I'd never imagined it,
Wow.
ever. Ever.
Wow.
It never occurred to me. I figured that I would play guitar. I thought that I would be in some sort of a band or something all of my life because I had done it since I was 12 or 13 years old. I was the kid who owned the PA system and knew how to set it up and do all that. But when I encountered the business, it was all so brand new to me. I had no preconceived notions about it whatsoever. And I was thankfully led by veterans who saw something in me, and they opened doors. They took me to meetings at Warner Chapel that you even
Yeah.
mentioned. I got signed to a publishing deal in one day. So it was just not the typical struggle or Nashville story. And I think at that point in time, the whole city was riding a wave. and no
Mm,
one really we just knew it was coming and coming and coming, and so we just went.
wow. So when you talk about your publishing deal, this is something that I think a lot of songwriters would be interested in, especially someone with your experience. How did you choose the performing rights organization you decided to align yourself with?
My pals who were
Yeah.
holding my hand at the time, also, the PRO relationship is a very personal one. I have worked for all of them, ASCAP, BMI, and currently CSAC, who
Mhm.
I've been at for many years. I have award-winning songs at every one of those places. Um, millionaire songs at every one of those places. The money's the money, you know? Anyone can get caught in a situation where there is an enormous discrepancy. There are ways to kind of work through that. To me, the PRO is much more about, do you feel like you resonate with sort of your person, your man or woman or whatever there that's kind of got your back, and you can pick up the phone, and talk to. And I wound up as a BMI writer because um, early in my career, because I took a meeting with over there with Jody, and he was just like, I just like this guy. He is my guy.
Mm.
Say it could have just as easily happened at ASCAP. So I encourage writers that are just now getting going. Um, the PROs are a pretty level playing field if you're just getting going. And you can get on a podcast with someone who completely disagrees with me about that.
Sure.
But for me, I feel like they're pretty even playing field in terms of structurally, what do they do? Go out and get your money.
Yeah.
That's being performed. Find some place with someone who gets you and who you feel like you have an advocate in. It's a
Mm.
difficult industry. You need advocates at every single place.
And with that in mind, the publishing company scenario. So again, it's the same situation. And now this is another dark art word, publishing, because you say in this digital day and age, what does that mean? What does that entail? It doesn't mean the same thing it used to, or does it? How did you? And again, obviously, you had great mentors, and you were in a situation where there were opportunities that may not necessarily have been something you had to seek. They were just there, and they had opportunities. But if you were going to advise someone now, given all you've experienced on connecting with a publishing company, what would be that advice to that person?
Make enough noise independently so that you go in with some leverage. If you go in unleveraged, you're going to get a bad deal, probably going to get shuffled to the side and not get the attention that we used to get, in these fantastic publishing houses where everybody went to work there every day. And we would see something like that's Michael. He wrote Slow Hand for Eric Clapton, and he's just getting coffee at the coffee, you know?
Yeah,
And so it was like that community has fractured in the digital age like all communities have.
sure.
It's never coming back together. And so I believe that the test now for any young person, and please understand, I have 2 daughters who are in the music business. They are both professional songwriters. They could never come up through my path.
Mm,
They are wildly successful at what they do. But you have to create your own vertical silo with the digital tools that are out there enough to garner the attention and have some leverage going into a publisher, um, and then make the deal if you decide that that's the path that you need to go on. And of course, the two-edged sword, and I'm talking a lot, is that if you get far enough along in your individual efforts to be able to take it to a publisher, do you need one?
mm,
And you need to have your attorney, you need to have your team to look really carefully at, you know, what am I giving up to get from this behemoth universal music that exists all over the world? Or what am I gaining by just keeping and growing my own little silo now that's got them excited enough to feel like that I might be worth something? Because believe me, if a publisher feels like that you're worth something, they're going to want a piece of it.
Hmm.
And if you've gotten to the point where you're worth enough for a publisher to want a piece of it, you might want to just keep it.
It's great advice. Well, let me ask you. So, as you look back, I mean, the reality of your journey is very simple. You are a member of a very elite group of guys and gals that were in Nashville at the right place, right time, doing great things. That ultimately, you're one of the architects of that new modern country sound that we talk about that still gets emulated to this day. So, I'm just going to ask you very bluntly: does it piss you off that people rip you off or take motifs or themes or things you do and not do them as well as you do now in this day and age? Or is it just water under the bridge?
It was not water under the bridge. The first time that I heard a four on the floor kick drum and a banjo
Mm,
riff, and it wasn't my and Keith Urban's song,
yeah.
yeah, I was hot about it. Um, but whatever,
Sure.
it happens. Um, I know a lot of people, beautiful, talented folks who are no longer in the industry simply because they would not keep up with where it was going,
Mm,
and there's a place to fight. There's a place to vent over a couple of beers with your buddy. And then there's a place where you go, okay, the model has changed and I still need to put my kids through college. Let's have a look at this.
mm. Do you this is another, these are tough questions, so, thanks for playing along.
Yep.
Um, Songwriting from my perspective, it used to be, because of the way the industry was structured from a distribution standpoint, a very lucrative possibility and opportunity. Not so much anymore.
Mm-mm.
So, if you were coming up now, if you're 20 years old in 2024 looking at songwriting, do you think you'd be as excited about it? Given some of the stories, people are always going to hear stories about the Monties of the world and then the Neil Diamonds, like all the guys that were songwriting when songwriting was the core of what our business did. Now that music is just a loss leader to sell technology, do you think that the charm of songwriting has sort of suffered, or do you think there's still a lot of people out there trying to put their heart and soul into a craft, and it's just a smaller market that's going to appreciate it?
I think the latter. Um, I do think it's a calling. I do think that it is an art, and substitute spoken word poetry for songwriting. Was it ever a seven-figure a year business? No. Are there spoken word poets everywhere all over the world? Have there always been? Will there always be? Yes.
Mm,
I really believe that we just bumped up to a tangent moment when the finances were a different thing. And the same thing is true of film. The same thing is true of
sure.
novels. Same thing is true of visual arts. I was one of the lucky ones. Um, and and now I'll completely undo that by telling you I'm still a songwriter,
Yeah, of course.
still what I do. And if you're not reinventing yourself every 18 months to 2 years as a songwriter, you're out of the game. So, at some level, I still am a 22-year-old because I've got to re-enter this market every 18 months just like you do, or just like anyone else who wants to do this. Whether you had hits in the 90s, the 70s, whatever it is, you have to re-enter where the industry is. So, having said that, and again, I want to be transparent to the real folks out
Yeah,
here. The only people that are listening to this are the people who give a damn, okay?
exactly.
I do as well as a songwriter as I used to,
Mm,
but I do almost no traditional songwriting, get it to an artist, get it to a record label, hope it gets out there, hope it sells 5 million records like a Rascal Flatts record I was on because that was a big payday. It's still out there, but I think that you have to be able to go and find it in other places. And so my encouragement to, other songwriters would be there's a living out there There's a way to monetize what it is that you do, but if you're chasing a model that's 10 or 15 or honestly 6 months old, you're probably a little behind the curve.
Mm, okay. So with that in mind, you touched on two things. I've always been curious, especially when it's and you're a perfect study for this. So you write a song, you co-write with someone, you and Keith write a song, and then Keith gets super recognizable and famous for the song, and nobody you could walk by a crowd of people and nobody even knows your name. Is that a weird is there ever a jealousy or a weird thing that happens as it's part of you've co-created this thing as well and you feel like you're not getting recognized? Is that ever a resentment issue or are you at peace with it from the get-go?
I wasn't at peace with it super, super early on. Again, I think it takes a particular kind of A-type character with an enormous amount of ambition to be able to make it in this industry because it just chews people up and spits them out regularly.
Mm,
Um, I'm also 63, and so that has not been an issue for me for a long, long, long time. It's like I was so thankful for my success. Um, I also have driven more than one of my friends to rehab.
mm,
It's a different lifestyle,
sure.
I became comfortable with being behind the scenes, behind the glass, um, getting my thing filled by knowing there were millions of people out there listening to my song, whether I was on the bus or whether I was on the stage or not. So it's placing some of those same needs that an artist wants, that ambition, but placing them in different containers.
Mm.
That really started to work for me, and I made peace with not being famous or not being on a stage a long, 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 long time ago.
Did you ever find at any point in the success arc of your career, so you write a hit song, it's huge. Did you ever find yourself thinking, "Well, I just do that again," to the detriment of the next song, where you have to stop yourself and be like, "Well, no, I don't wanna do the same thing again," or is the expectation, from the artist and the label, "Well, you wrote me a hit, just write me the same hit again and again and again, and we'll do this until we can't do it anymore."
Mhm. Um, I think there's always a tension there between the 2. All artists wanna grow,
Sure.
um, but I think it's important to also realize when you've hit upon something that works, and I think that way too many songwriters, um, wanna write the next thing without realizing that they really captured something in the last thing, and there's nothing lost, and there's no pride lost in going, "This formula worked."
Mm.
I'm gonna tell you something, because it's still hard.
Yeah, of
It's
course.
still hard to do, you know? So, yeah, listen to some of the Keith Urban hits. They all exist in a little vertical together, with the occasional, "Till Summer Comes Around," which was a hit that I had with him. It's totally different from anything else
Mhm.
that we did. But not only did he want to do that to feed the hunger in his fans to hear something that was familiar and felt like the next small step, we wanted to as well. Um, so I don't think that there's anything in the world wrong with standing on what you've done, repeating themes and motifs and using craft that has worked over and over again. I think all artists do it, It's like
So
you'd be disappointed if you picked up a John Grisham novel and it read like Gone with the Wind. You just would be.
that's true. So to that veil, so do you find when you write, even to this day, given all the folks you've worked with and written for specifically and otherwise, is it difficult for you to have your own voice without having the tinge of all the people you've worked with kind of voice all intermingled in there?
It was nearly impossible, and that was the only thing that ever led to me having a real dark moment or season in this industry. because I came in writing for a band. Yes, it was a band I helped create. You all of a sudden you're writing with and for Keith Urban, with and for Rascal Flatts, with and for Lady Antebellum, and every one of those attempts to write with those artists, the artist always has the veto, right? It's their career. They got to sing it. I cannot tell you how many times I have made a suggestion of a lyric or guitar chord, interesting chord to Keith Urban, sitting in a room and him going, I'm just not going to do that, Monty. About 15 years of being told we're not going to do that wore itself thin on me. And so I made my own little singer-songwriter, album called 47 Minutes of Your Time. I named it that because I wanted people to listen to it from top to bottom the way that I listened to records when I used to buy them. I listened to them as a concept. What in the world is Firefall, one of my favorite bands, or Alice Cooper, one of my favorite artists of all time? What's he gonna say to me in this album? Top to bottom. I wrote everything by myself. I played everything on it. I engineered it. I mastered it. I did not want anyone's hands even close to the finished part of this project. And I put it out. It did really well. It went right kind of to the top of, at the time, I guess it was iTunes, singer-songwriter stuff for a hot minute. And it was a really healing process for me, but I had to do it. If I didn't do that, I believe I might have gone down the bitter old man shakes fist at cloud route.
Okay, so you do the solo record, but then a few years later, now you and your wife, you have a band called Troubadour 77.
Yeah.
And this band, currently still active, playing, doing stuff, writing songs, is purposefully driven by a theme of kind of like SoCal, like that 70s, that if you grew up in the Laurel Canyon area of California during a particular time. And it's weird because once you articulated it, I remember talking about this with you years ago. It's like, well, yeah, the Eagles, Jackson Brown, Linda Ronstadt, there is a very specific sound to the Southern California rock and roll. Talk to me about that, because that sound, and I mean this in the nicest way, that's not the Keith Urban sound. That's not the Monty that was writing in Nashville sound, but this is clearly a sound that was near and dear to you. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that and how the Troubadour 77 kind of fits this process for you.
Well, you're a perceptive podcast host, because Troubadour 77 was exactly the same thing that the singer-songwriter record 47 Minutes of Your Time was for me as a songwriter. Troubadour 77 was my redemption as a guitar player. And I had spent my entire career writing songs, sitting in the room with the greatest guitar players in the world, Keith Urban. Try sitting in the room every day with Keith Urban and thinking you're a guitar player. Jimmy Olander, the greatest B-bender guitar player that ever lived, all the session players, and there was still an empty place in me as a guitar player that I wanted to fill. Anna Wilson, my wife, who was having an amazing vocal sort of jazz career, combining jazz and country in really interesting ways. She played with the first horn section that ever played on the Grand Ole Opry when she debuted her album. So we're pushing boundaries and stuff. And she came to me and she said, I want to do something in the vein of Laurel Canyon, in the vein of Joni Mitchell and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young and Jackson Brown, who is her hero. She says, I think I want to make a record like that. She was talking about a solo project. And over a couple of days, I thought about it and I went back to her and I went, I'll make that record on you as the producer. but honestly, I want it to be a band and I want to be in it.
Mm.
And we had never done that before because you're going to make your statement as a singer songwriter. I'm going to make my statement as a guitar player. And the two Troubadour 77 albums that we have out, currently did exactly for me what the 47 minutes of your time. I can listen back to that and I am completely fulfilled as a guitar player. I played every fucking thing on that record I ever wanted to play, you know,
Wow.
and I listen back to it and I'm not disappointed. I'm like, yeah, 25, 30 years later, I can play the guitar.
That what you just shared again. So the one thread through all of the guests we talked to, we just kind of try and talk about the reality of the life of being a musician. And one of the things I ask everyone that you just sort of alluded to is imposter syndrome, right? Am I good enough? Even
Right.
though clearly this is my job, otherwise Rick wouldn't be fucking talking to me to begin with. Am I still good enough to do this? And even someone in your situation where most people would think, like you said, this guy, he basically moved to Las Vegas and hit every jackpot in town at the time when all the jackpots were doing the thing jackpots do, and he still feels like he has something to prove. Is that, do you find that to be a common thread amongst your peers and the people you work with, where even though you're still there, there's a moment where you're like, was I good enough to do this? Did I get it all done? Am I still good enough?
It never goes away for anyone that I have ever known that ever made it.
Hmm.
I think if you have that thing, that that tenacity, I'm not talking about the gift and the craft. Some people are talented and don't know it. Some people are not talented and know it. Whatever.
Right.
Take talent out of it. I'm talking about the get in there and make it happen in one of the most difficult industries in the world. Everyone I know that has ever made it suffers from that syndrome.
Hmm.
Or I think that they would have been the dropouts a long time ago.
So along those lines, as you look back, and again, it's amazing. I am spoiled, everyone, because I've known Monty before the podcast, and I'm very familiar with his career. You don't have to pick the one, but give us one session during the highlight of your career where you're asked to write with, or I know you've MD'd a lot, you've done a lot of things where you walked into the room nervous before you even started. We're like, okay, oh shit, what's this moment going to be? Who can I do this? They think I can do this, but can I do this?
I was the musical director for a television program called Kenny Rogers, The First 50. It was a live to film event celebrating Kenny Rogers' 50 years in the industry. And everyone was there to celebrate and sing with him. Dolly, Lionel Richie, Alison Krauss, Winona Judd, Smokey Robinson, just to name a few. My chest is doing this right now, thinking about it. And I had to have all of these artists choose a song that they wanted to do with Kenny Rogers. I had to write the arrangements. I can literally barely breathe right now to make it happen. And then go and pull it off in a live setting at Foxwoods Casino in Connecticut. I don't know how much time we have, but I promise you
all the time. Yeah.
This is a good story.
Yeah.
Kenny and Dolly Parton and Lionel Richie are going to sing as the big culminating song through the years, his big hit. 3 of them. They all sing it in different keys. Somehow miraculously, I'm able to create an arrangement and hide the modulations enough that it just doesn't feel like that we're just ham-handedly doing this. Shout out to Barry Manilow, you know, modulate.
Right.
I wanted it to be more subtle than that. I get these things together and I feel really good about it. And we're doing rehearsals and I'm working, I think at the time I'm working with Smokey Robinson out on the stage, doing his thing. And my production assistant, who was my daughter at the time, comes and says, "Hey, it's time to work on Through the Years." Um, there's a rehearsal room upstairs and they're waiting on you. And I'm like, okay, I've got Smokey. I'm sorry, I got to go. I got to go take care of this. I'm in this mindset. I walk up, I open this door up. It's a small, like little classroom size thing. There's a piano there with Kenny Rogers, piano player, sitting there. There are 3 metal folding chairs in a row. Kenny Rogers, Dolly Parton, Lionel Richie sitting there. Fluorescent lights, just horrible.
Yeah.
And I swung the door open and I stepped in and I froze. And I said, Hang on a second, guys. I forgot my chart. I'll be back in just a minute." And I stepped outside of the door and I leaned against the wall and I cried like a baby.
Mm.
And I got my shit together and I went back in and we worked on it. And for the next hour, I had to stand there and go, "Dolly, I'm sorry. That's not your starting note. But here's the thing. I wrote this specifically so that Lionel would end on this note and you would be a fifth above him. So here's your interval. Can we try that one more time?" And she's like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm just not hearing it right now." And that was in some ways maybe the highlight of my career,
Wow.
was being able to recognize that moment for what it was, but to also recognize why I'd been hired for that gig and to get it done. And it was difficult. They were pros. They never got upset. They were apologetic. And it was, I don't know, it was just one of those crazy, amazing things that's happened to me over this long career.
Well, and the reality of that scenario is that it's 3 legendary songwriters celebrating one legendary songwriter being music directed by another future legendary songwriter. So to hear you say there's no egos involved. I hope everyone's paying attention, because at the level of the game those 3 individuals were at that particular point in time in their career, they had shaped American country and pop music beyond anything any of their peers could have ever hoped to do. So, I mean, you're basically looking at Taylor Swift. Before it was Taylor Swift, there was Dolly Parton. You're right. And before there was Michael Jackson, there's Kenny Rogers and Lionel. It's like, it's insane
Yeah.
that you would have to correct. And it's also humbling to hear that Dolly Parton didn't just come out of the shot perfect singing, that she might have needed some help. I mean, that's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
None of them did. You know why? Because it's fucking hard.
Yeah.
And they do it for a living. There was never a moment where where I felt anything other than the syndrome that we just talked about, which is, "Oh my God, why can't I hear that note? Why can't I hear that note, Kenny?"
Yeah.
"I don't know, Dolly." How we finally got the note? It's Dolly, it's the interval in Star Wars. Ba ba. And she's like, "Oh, I think I can hear that."
Nice.
It went off without a hitch, like, after that.
It's 2 of my favorite things in one conversation: Star Wars and Dolly Parton. So it's already the best podcast I've ever done. So, okay. So along this journey, and this is something that, again, all the songwriters are listening. Can you talk about, and this is a kind of an obscure thing, but like the what you've seen as being the change in the deliverable for a songwriter. People, again, in the 70s probably think, well, it was just a dude and an acoustic guitar, and then they built the arrangement around it. Fast forward to, does it have to be the full production you're delivering now? Can you talk us through what the kind of that journey was from your starting point?
Sure. I feel like that that there's a few broad phases. Again, I'm sure much more well-versed music critics and historians would have their take on this, but it seems sort of like I'm only gonna go as far back as the Beatles
Sure.
was, this exploration of, what can we do when, melody meets melodies and lyrics that can be about anything from a glass onion to a walrus. It doesn't fucking matter. But when melodies meet whatever I happen to be thinking about and we marry it with this emerging new technology, what do we get? Then I think there's this moment, the singer-songwriter moment, where what happens if I just sit here a little high in my bedroom, play my guitar, and basically give the world my diary,
Mm.
you know? And that's what we get with James Taylor and Harry Chapin and Joni Mitchell and folks like that. Completely different from the Beatles. There's no walruses. There's only me and what I feel and what I bet you feel and that kind of thing. And then, and there's a bunch more, but I think that the next huge paradigm is what can be done rhythmically. What can be done rhythmically, and we still call this a song. And that's where rap and hip hop suddenly take the stage, and we find that it is not melodically driven. It is not necessarily lyrically driven. We've gone a little bit back to the Beatles where now it just has to rhyme. So as long as you could say, convection and election and it sounds cool, I don't give a shit what you mean. Eventually I understand that the narrative means something, but in the middle of any of these songs, it might just be a way to connect it sonically. And so I feel like that we're in the age of rhythmically, beat wise, what can we do and it still be a song?
Hmm.
That's a lot of talk to
Yeah.
get to my point, which is that is why I encourage songwriting today to work with a track, to work with a beat, to start maybe with that as the basis, still have something to stay, still have a melody in mind, but rhythmically, what is going on seems to be the driving force in this big third silo.
So as you've seen it from the inside, has the production standard changed? Meaning, do you have to deliver a fully completed radio ready track as the songwriter now to an artist, or can it still be a bare bones arrangement, or does it depend based on the artist or the publishing house?
I think it depends, but I think that the thing that you would notice if you took a bunch of, the most popular songs in the world, maybe over the last half a decade, and only and stripped away the vocals and the lyrics and only listened to them as karaoke tracks, they're extraordinarily simple
Hmm.
and extraordinarily sparse. And that's why I think that that's why I make records in the room that I'm sitting in. There is no big tracking room behind me. There is no glass. There's me and my computers and my Toontrack software.
Wah wah.
And
Shameless plug.
it is not even shameless because I actually want to talk about that at some point in time. Because the tools have been delivered to us. The tools have been delivered to me to create from scratch. Things go from this desk right here, and I'm going to do it. You can get mad at me, but things can go from right here with easy drummer 3, easy keys 2, easy bass as the foundation to the radio, directly to the radio or to television or to film. So we're in a really interesting paradigm now where I create often things that turn out to be the rough demo, and my buddy Dan Huff takes it in with, you know, players and recreates it into that style. Or many times it completely bypasses that same thing. And then we're like, well, I mean, what are we trying to do? The essence of everything that we want is right here. Why are we doing an intermediary step?
Mhm.
More and more often, we don't do the intermediary step. It just gets created and it gets put out.
Wow. Well, and that is, again, to your point, I thank you for the love and the kind words about Toontrack. Do you wish when you were starting out as a younger man, obviously it was a very different process. You needed a studio, you needed the session players, and that needs money. So in a lot of instances, at the early onset of your career, you're spending money to get your songs made and produced, and it's substantially more money than you would spend today on building just a home studio. Now it's a one-time expense of I have to build a home studio. Was that an obstacle early in your career? Having the financial resources to get something prepared the way you would hear it in your head?
I think it was the ultimate barrier of entry to not only songwriters, but to also recording artists. I believe that the heyday of the big publishing company and the heyday of the big record companies were specifically because they were able to combine the notion of creative gatekeepers with great ears who understood talent with banking. And that's
So,
all it is. That's
yeah,
all it was.
it's an essential feature
Banking.
that people they don't like to talk about, but it's just a loan, folks. It's just
It's just a loan. It's just a loan. You will
it.
pay it back with interest, whether you realize it or not. But I had to have it.
Yeah.
Right. I had to have it. James Brown had to have it.
Yeah.
Nobody had a recording studio. You had to have the bank fund these fundamentally expensive undertakings to be able to get it out there. That is no longer, that is just no longer the case. It has turned everything upside down.
So through this whole journey, are there, and I'm going to presume the answer is yes, but I want to hear you say it. Do you ever write something and then think this is awesome, and then go away from it for a couple days and come back and go, what the hell was what was this? It's like, it's indiscernible to me. I'm not a fan anymore.
So you're going to make me say these words, aren't you?
I am, because this is not for us. We're being selfless right now.
No, I like everything I write.
I love it.
I never go back to it and think, well, that's a piece of shit. I might go back to it and go, oh man, I missed that maybe there a little bit, and this might make that a little bit better. But no, that is not my experience.
For every Keith Urban or Rascal Flatts hit, how many songs lay in the wake behind that never made it out or never got recorded, that just ultimately sit in your mind or workbooks or hard drives somewhere?
300, 400, 500, thousands.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like them, Rick. I like them all for the most part. I really do. I really do. And I think that's a testament to having learned from people who knew what they were doing and getting my craft early up to a level where we just didn't make fatal mistakes. You didn't write at Warner Chapel in those writing rooms and make fatal mistakes. You were tossed out, if it didn't happen. And that was a beautiful thing about the time of coming up when the craft was held in such high regard.
Mm. So speaking of fatal mistakes, this is my transition. You recently, and by recently I mean a few years ago, you got into the world of theater, live theater. That's why I said fatal mistake. Anybody in the world of live theater knows it's one of two things. It's a fatal mistake or just a regular mistake. It's one or the other.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I want you to. Okay, we know that the first solo record, Healing, did some redemptive stuff. Then we know the band Troubadour 77 with your wife, who is, by the way, Anna Wilson, amazing pianist and vocalist. You need to check it out. Also, though, redemptive for you, So now I'm trying to piece together this. It's like you don't have enough to do. You've got, you've married, you got your kids, you've got this career that is still flourishing. You have this band, you have all these. At one point in time, you were doing a music festival, and so you had all these things. Why not complicate my life in ways that I couldn't imagine could be there and start a live theater production of something?
Yeah.
What's this all about?
Yeah. Have you have you ever met a tortured artist, Saul?
Apparently,
It's what
I,
we do.
but man, you talk about the diversity and just going down all the roads, and it's this amazing thing where it's like, you know what, I haven't done this yet. Let's try this.
All of this, all of this is about redemption and about redeeming uncared for parts of my soul. And when I say my soul, I mean our soul, your soul, the soul of all of us who undertake this. And do not take it lightly. It's the most serious thing ever to me. It became really important for me and for Anna to tell the story of who are these people? Who are these people? I hear about these people that they write songs for a living, that they don't become famous. Apparently, they get their money in a mailbox. I don't. The world writ large is so not tuned in to really anything much, except a tiny little silo of what's going on in your 9 to 5. And yet we're changing millions of people's lives. They're singing our songs at their wedding, at their fucking funeral. I have had people walk up to me and say, "I heard One of These Days by Tim McGraw, and it saved my life. I was literally contemplating suicide until I heard that song." That song's just written in a room like this, but then it goes out and it does its work in the world. Who are these people? Who are these people? Right?
Right.
That's what the musical is, because we still do it. It was a chance to pull back the curtain on a regular guy from North Georgia and a regular girl from outside of Philadelphia who heard the call to come to the songwriting capital of the world, and like Kenny Rogers says, change the world with my little songs. And, people know the Keith Urban story. They know the Prince story. They have the documentaries. Where's our story? When have we ever told people who we are? They know us, but they don't know us. And it became a consuming passion now for nearly 5 years to create something that someone could sit in an audience, not really knowing much about our industry or anything, and understand who a songwriter is.
So did you find, since it's your production, and obviously it stems from life experience and history and everything you've learned, but I'm sure the driving force, because you're creative, music is part of the driving force, but only this much of a live stage production focuses in and or around music, and there's so many other things. Do you find that your diverted attention because you're the boss? There's when something has to happen to you, is it difficult to focus in on the music and enjoy it the way you might think you do, or do you have that capacity where you can have 85,000 things going on and people depending on you, and you can still focus in on the music?
Pretty good at that multitasking. Um, would I be able to up that just pure enjoyment of performance a notch or two without the overhead of being the creator and the producer and the actor acting, but playing myself, but acting, playing myself, acting? Um, yes. Also, I have 8 pedals in front of me, and I am forwarding every video clip, every picture, the script on the teleprompter, in real time to everything that is happening. It's probably the most difficult thing that I've ever undertaken. It is what I wanted because we got 4 or 5 more hours? And so here, because here's the deal. Nobody gonna drop $1,000,000 in my tip jar so that I can have someone do that. You
Sure.
know, we're songwriters. We're trying to break I'm trying to create a genre that has never even existed before, which is songwriters on theater stages. You know, we play clubs. You know, we
Right.
plug our guitar in our acoustic guitar into whatever shitty Mackie PA they got and try to change the world. I wanted the same production values that the people that were singing my songs all over the world for us. But that's not just gonna happen.
Mm.
We have to do it on our own. So, I wanted to be able to do it with just the 2 of us because I knew that that was gonna be the only way we were ever gonna actually ever really get started, you know? I couldn't start with a crew. I couldn't start with a guitar tech and things like that. So, it's a really big undertaking, but on purpose, we'd literally throw it into a Sprinter van and go do it somewhere, at a community theater or someplace that's not a club, but recognizes that this belongs on a theater stage.
Was the experience of acting and being on stage and doing all this stuff, was it what you thought it would be? Similar to playing in a band, similar to playing a guitar, or a different set of chops for you?
It was a very, easy transition for me. I'd done, like, the high school acting thing and musical stuff, you know, so it was like, and I am playing me, and
Helps.
I did write the script. So there are my words, you know, so it's not me even trying to, you know, interpret our town or something, you know. It was a difficult transition for Anna. She'd never experienced anything like setting aside a piece of you and then creating a fictional version of it.
Mm.
She took to it really quickly, but early on, it was a real thing. She was just like, "This is so different from me standing out and singing my song, you know, to accompaniment." And, so there were some transitions there, but she got to be really, really great at it, and we really enjoy doing it together.
Well, and for you in particular, as a pop and country songwriter, your economy of words and the way you take a story and create a narrative that's maybe literal, but could be also interpreted metaphorically. Did you find that that skill set helped when writing the script for this particular endeavor?
Yeah. Again, the second reason that you're the best podcast of all time. Um, yeah, that was the gig, right? That was the
Yeah.
undertaking. Was like, can I make spoken words sound like songs
Mm.
and still do the function of a script pushing a narrative along? And that is what we worked for 3 solid years before we ever even did one performance on, does this sound like a songwriter wrote this narrative? Because it is about songwriters. And so, yeah, the words and the narrative and the script of the play have the same lilt. They have the same it has the same alliteration and things, you know, that songs have.
Sure.
Doesn't necessarily have a rhyme scheme. It's not written like Shakespeare in iambic pentameter, but boy, does it ever sound like a songwriter wrote the words about the songs that they're singing.
You bring up another great point. You're good at bringing up these points. So if you go on YouTube, which everybody tends to do, or TikTok, and you just type in the phrase "how to write a song," there's going to be 75 million videos by people who ultimately aren't really known for writing songs or haven't really written anything anyone would ever think about. And they all seem to share the same, I'm not going to call it ridiculous, but they seem to oversimplify the craft of creating something that people will cherish and enjoy. When you look at songwriting in today, in 2024,
Mhm.
do you think, and this is a pure opinion question, do you think we still need songwriters that want to change the world? Or should we just settle for the songwriters that are just happy to entertain and distract the world? Or do we need both?
Absolutely, we need both. Um, we need McDonald's,
Yeah,
you know?
sure.
We need the Snake River Grill in Jackson Hole. I think there's a place for all of it.
Yeah.
I think that some of us are called to closer to one end of the spectrum than maybe another. My wife and I were both called closer to the end of the spectrum of let's change the world, let's up the craft, you know?
Yeah.
I really have no issues with anywhere on the spectrum of where people land if they're honest about it, and if they meet the moment with what they think is their best effort. Because it's hard to write a simple song. It's hard to write a silly song.
Yeah.
It's all hard. It's all hard.
Do you have any and again, I'm looking over here so that people know that they're important too. At the time of filming this, again, I've said this a couple times in this particular span of podcasts we've done, AI is quickly taking over the world and your jobs and your family. It's not doing anything, but it exists, and certainly it's going to attack the lowest hanging fruit, which is creatives. So, with that in mind, Monty, and you've seen obviously here in the States, we seem to be in some sort of blitz scaling nightmare with AI where it's the only thing anyone's talking about. And it is, I mean, to be fair, it's impressive and it's getting quicker and faster and better. And of course, music is right in its crosshairs at the early onset. I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer or input. Do you, as an observer of this, seeing what's happening, what are your thoughts? Any thoughts to share with anyone? I have my own, and none of them are negative, unfortunately. But how do you feel about the current AI trend, focusing its sights on music and changing the way that people work with, write, and conceive music, especially from a songwriting standpoint?
Mhm. Um, I don't have any problems at all with AI.
I don't
I
either.
don't I don't fear it. Um, and here's the way that I look at it. Um, I am a humanist. I'm a sect, you know, um, secular humanist.
Hmm.
And I know for a fact, because I'm the one doing it, that all that I'm doing is going back to the John Denver records that I know, to the Alice Cooper records that I know, to the things I cannot tell you how many times I have been in a songwriting session and gone, let's do this. You know, the way James Taylor did in so and so, so and so. It might not be the same words, but it is conceptually built on the memory bank
Hmm.
of what I have encountered as a human, and that's all the AI is doing.
Yeah, just faster.
Simply
It's
retrieving things that it has bumped into the same way that I have, because none of us do this from whole cloth. None of us do this from
mm,
tabula rosa, from a blank page. We are only ever recycling what we know and occasionally pushing the one peg at a
yeah.
time on the cribbage board. Occasionally. Mostly, we're recycling what it is that we know. That's all that AI is doing. I don't fear that. Um, and I don't think that other people should as well. It is not a zero-sum world. There has always been room for Don't Worry, Be Happy, for the Macarena, and for Born to Run.
Preach. So let's okay. Most underrated, in your opinion. There's no right or wrong answer. Most underrated songwriter of the '70s.
Harry Chapin.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Didn't even hesitate.
I know that was you were quick. I would. Yeah, I wouldn't have hesitated either. I wouldn't have said Harry Chapin. I would have said Dave Loggins because I think Dave Loggins is a phenomenal songwriter.
Yeah.
Um,
Rest in peace, by the way.
rest in peace. Exactly.
And Dave Loggins was in the building, when I
It's
y
insane.
y that's the point. You see what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
He was there and I was there. It
Showing
was
up to work like it's a job.
I went up to work. Yeah.
So you have this incredibly vast kind of I'm kind of winding this down to try and put a bow on it because I could talk to you for 7 hours. Um, you're not stopping anytime soon, and it's clearly something that I think anyone with even one working eye could see. You're still incredibly passionate about it. You've been incredibly candid with us about some of the dark times, but how do you keep not interest because you're a creative. You don't have a choice. You were born this way. You're gonna create something. But given all you've seen, the highest highs, the lowest lows, everything, the 1 in a million, the unicorn, you're okay. So how do you keep your motivation to you personally? How do you wake up and think, let me ask you, sometimes it's easier to go with how do you don't. How do you not get up and be like, you know what? I already have written #1 hits. I've already worked with the greatest artists and people. I think I'm good. I'll just go play tennis for the rest of my life. How do you not do that at this stage in your career?
There's a piece of me that is there
Oh, okay. Good.
in complete transparency.
Yeah.
I don't need to write another song. I don't need to write another hit song. And I don't know. I may not need to write another song. That remains to be seen. I'm sure that, and I say that I wrote yesterday, because I was hired to write a song, which changes the dynamics of that parameter some, uh, as it should. I'm gonna suggest a second podcast for me and you where we talk about some of the specific things that I feel like that where songwriting and songwriters have gotten overlooked and missed in the, economic way of going about making their living, but we'll
We'll
again, we'll
come.
put
We
in
will.
that.
We'll follow up. You heard it here first. There will be a sequel.
Um, yeah, there's a part of me that wants to fish and play golf and ski, and I do. I don't feel compelled to have to make those statements much, um, anymore. Also, having said that, a half an hour before we did this podcast, I watched a Guthrie Trap guitar video on YouTube because
Nice.
I am a mediocre guitar player
Aren't we all?
at my best, at my best. Still have so much to learn. And I played things on the Troubadour 77 record that I hope someone listens to 100 years from now. I am proud of it. I wouldn't change a note. But is my growing over? No.
Mm.
Um, so I think that it's that piece of like there's still some discovery out there. Does it need to be a #1 song? Does it need to be in country music? Does Keith Urban have to like it? I don't give a shit. But I do want to continue to grow in my craft and in my music. I never wanted to be an engineer.
Mm.
And now I engineer, mix and master everything that I do, and those are the dynamics of the industry that place you and it either runs people away or it turns on a light switch at someone that says, "Okay, well, now I gotta be the fucking engineer.
Right.
Let's go. Give me Cubase and let's get started." And so that still remains for me.
Mm. Okay. I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning now. We're going to close with this because I didn't talk about this one little career highlight of yours from many, many years ago. Let's talk about the Allstate jingle. Let's not neglect your foray into the commercial advertising world and the effect that it had on your writing career. Why don't you walk our listeners through the infamous Allstate jingle?
Yes, I sold my soul.
Now, this is years ago. This is the beginning of your career, correct? I mean,
This would have been 84, 3 or 4. Wow.
Yeah,
I can't believe you did this to me.
I'm
Uh,
gonna.
I was newly married at 21 for all the wrong reasons, that I thought were the right reasons. And,
Thanks, religion.
yes, thank you so much. Exactly. Thank you, mom and dad, for sending me to a college where on the first day they say, "Welcome, you came here to find a wife." Um, and I needed to make some money.
Okay.
And so a buddy of mine, uh, had started working for a small jingle company in Nashville, and I said, "I need a gig."
Also a very hard industry, to your point, though, from
Very,
real
very hard industry.
competitive, and especially at that time,
Yes,
super
yes.
difficult.
And jingles were jingles. They don't even exist now. That's literally one of
Yeah.
those great, you know,
Yeah.
other conversations about how things can exist, and suddenly they don't even exist anymore. Um, and so I took a job selling jingles and would travel to Boston and Cleveland and go and rip the yellow pages from a payphone out and get the advertiser companies and go knock cold call on their door and play them our reel to reel of some of the jingles that we had. And I wasn't creating anything. I was trying to make $500 by selling a jingle, but I knew, and I've said this before in other videos and podcasts, maybe even with Toontrack. Proximity. Proximity. Be close to the industry that you wanna be in.
Mm.
So here I was in the jingle house. Was I out there creating anything? No. I was back on a phone selling, but I was 15 feet away from the people who were creating stuff. And I knew one of these days, somebody was gonna be sick, somebody was gonna be on vacation, they were gonna need something, and I was gonna say, "Can I take a shot at that?" And that is exactly what happened. Not for Allstate. I wrote the first thing. They realized that I had talent, and I was invited into the creative room. And I still sold the jingles, but then I also got to create them. And it was a great learning experience because a songwriter takes the most complex things in the world. John Lennon takes the most complex thing you can imagine and gets it into 3 minutes of imagine.
Mhm.
Said it twice. We're doing it in 30 seconds. So, boy, you want to talk about honing that craft. And at the time, the big um, sort of deliverable was that an ad in the Super Bowl cost $1 million. I remember when it broke the $1 million plane, and it was news. I mean, you'd see
Yeah.
it as ad in Super Bowl now costs $1 million. And we had done some regional work for Allstate, and had done well for their regional. And I think that somebody at a regional Allstate thing had passed us up to the national advertiser. And also understand that those were all competitions. They would ask 10 jingle
Oh,
houses
absolutely, yeah.
to create something, do a demo of it, send it in, you know. And so I was able to write this very short 30-second thing with my co-creators, and they chose it. And we got to watch it, you know, on the Super Bowl. But that was maybe the best learning ground to be a songwriter ever, was sell my product in 30 seconds now.
For insurance, the most unsexy thing you can have a jingle about.
Absolutely.
In the
But
'80s.
touches on the most important thing that any people have, which are safety, death,
Yeah,
uh, you know,
sure.
so to be able to mine some of those things that would eventually become these overriding things in all songwriting and just do it for pure cruel advertising, you know, was I a capitalist pig at the moment? Sure. But did it teach me how to reach in and find the stuff and pull it out? Yeah.
Mm. I love it. Look, the reality is we have so much more to talk about, so we're gonna do this again. But if we don't let these people get back to work or leave the bathroom stall wherever they're watching this, we're gonna get in trouble. So I'm gonna just turn for a second, after I have to talk to Monty. I'm gonna come back to you, just hold on. But you know how much I love you, and I'm a fan, and I am just humbled and grateful that you took some time out for us today. And if I'm being really honest, I mean, the level of candid stuff, I mean, we're just grateful. I think a lot of people are inspired by your journey, right? And I think I know I personally always feel better selfishly that I'm not the only person that has to fail forward, because that seems to be a dying concept in a lot of what we do these days. Like, oh, I didn't work, so I just quit. Where it's like, well, no, you get back up and you try hard, you keep going, keep going. And man, if you do it long enough, you don't even realize you're failing anymore. You just tried something and you go somewhere and it gets easier every time. And you are the embodiment of that with your career. That's why I wanted to end with Allstate. It's sort of like, well, there's probably no doubt in your mind you knew you could write for a superstar one day. But I'm sure when you're just trying to keep a roof over your new family's head and sort out all your own personal and emotional baggage about music and life in general, you're not thinking about it, but you do it anyway, right? And like you said, you were in the proximity, and it's just amazing stuff. We're just fans of yours. We just are. I love you. Toontrack loves you. Everybody that gets the opportunity to come in contact with you is grateful that they know you. So just thank you for everything. We really do appreciate you, man.
I love you too. You came to my home and helped me learn some of the things that I was in the process of learning that were new and difficult to me, that now I stand on the shoulders of 15 years later. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the support that Toontrack has always had for me, and I appreciate how often you guys reference songwriters as you talk about what the products can do for people. You see us and you recognize us, and that means the world to us. And I will never use another Toontrack product again if we don't do at least another second one of these podcasts.
We will. It's a guarantee. It's a promise. I'm going to tell these people goodbye, and then I'll tell you goodbye. So listen, you were fortunate enough to be a fly on the wall for this conversation with me and our friend. Now, he started as my friend. Now he's your friend as well. It's Monty Powell. So just like he said, there's going to be a follow-up conversation to this one here in the near future where we're going to talk about different things and not Allstate. Although I encourage everyone watching to Google Monty Paul Allstate commercial and go online and listen to it and check it out. You'll find it. It's out there. The only reason I know this is because I'm evil and I did it already. So I've done the work for you. Enjoy the fruits of the internet. But for you, thank you for tuning in. I'm Rick. This has been the Sound Horizons podcast brought to you by Toontrack. And we are grateful you took some time out of your workday, hopefully, and did nothing but watch this to enjoy us and this conversation. We look forward to seeing you soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.